They found her at dawn, sitting in the center of what used to be a battlefield, alone, silent, her rifle still warm in her hands. The enemy gone, all of them. No reinforcements had come, no backup had arrived, just her, and a story no one could explain, until they looked closer and realized everything they thought they knew about warfare was wrong. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching this from? And what's the most powerful story of redemption you've ever seen or felt? Welcome to Grateful Stories, where tales of compassion and kindness are told. Let's uncover what really happened. The bolt clicked into place with a quiet metallic snap. Avery Dalton wiped the last trace of carbon from the receiver of her M4, then paused as a soft static crackled from the radio just outside the armory. A brief message, meant for someone else, slid through the comms before silence returned. Casualty report confirmed. Staff Sergeant Elkins, KIA at Fort Claiborne, ambushed during morning patrol. Her fingers froze mid-motion. Elkins, a name she knew. A man who taught her how to field strip a saw one-handed, who'd once given her an extra protein bar when she missed chow. Avery blinked hard, but the sting behind her eyes spread faster than she could stop it. A tear slipped down her cheek, streaking a path through the faint grime on her face. Someone coughed behind her. She didn't turn, didn't acknowledge the two soldiers walking past, but she could hear them just fine. "Here we go again," one muttered. "Crybaby Dalton, back at it." "Oh, she was like this last week when the coffee machine broke," the other whispered, barely holding back a laugh. But neither of them stayed to watch what came next. Avery stood, walked to the firing line, and picked up her carbine. 15 rounds, 15 hits, one after the other. No hesitation, no misses. The paper target at 75 meters had no face left when she was done. Her stance had been flawless, her breathing controlled, her grip unshaken. But all they remembered were the tears. She'd started hearing it 2 months ago. Cry baby. It had started as a joke. Now it followed her like her shadow. Her official performance reviews described her as technically exceptional, but emotionally volatile. Informal rumors were harsher, too soft, too unstable, a liability. None of them knew what she really saw, what she sensed. At the FOB Redwater, Avery wasn't just another logistics specialist with a marksman tab. She was something else, something they couldn't name. And because they couldn't name it, they feared it. She'd walked into the medical tent once, seconds before a fistfight broke out between two exhausted soldiers over a stolen protein pouch. She'd pulled one aside, cracked a joke about his socks, and diffused the whole situation. No one realized what she'd done. 2 weeks later, she intercepted a junior private who was shaking, silent, gripping the edge of his cot so hard his knuckles turned white. She brought him tea, asked him about home, sat with him for 2 hours. 2 days later, the medic formally diagnosed early-stage PTSD. Nobody had told her to watch him. Nobody noticed his tremor. But she did. They never saw those moments. They only saw her crying when a drone footage video played during a mission briefing. They only saw her go quiet and glassy-eyed when a civilian casualty report was read aloud. Even Captain Huxley, who once spoke to her with something close to pride, had turned cold. That first week at Redwater, he'd shaken her hand like he meant it. "Dalton," he'd said, "I've read your training records. Top percentile on every weapon system. I like shooters. Don't make me regret pulling strings to get you here." 3 days later, he walked in on her alone in the rec room, eyes red, watching a news clip of a village rescue gone wrong. He didn't speak, just stared and walked out. After that, his expectations narrowed like a closing door. Now, she was the best shot on base and the least trusted. They kept her on supply rotations, ammo checks, radio monitoring, safe zones where no one needed to rely on her under fire. Not that she hadn't tried. She'd asked to be assigned to Bravo Team's Overwatch rotation. Huxley declined, She'd volunteered for night recon along the Brady Pass Ridge. He sent Dunn instead. "You're not being punished," he'd said in a tone that meant the opposite. "You're essential in your current role. Let's keep things where they work." She didn't argue anymore. Arguing made it worse. But inside, the tension was stretching thin. There were moments, brief and bitter, where Avery wondered if they were right. Maybe her heart was too open. Maybe it was a flaw. Then she'd see the pattern again, how Dunn couldn't look Rodriguez in the eye after a failed patrol. How the lieutenant medic flinched every time the PA system crackled. How the smiles disappeared from the breakfast line after a certain name was mentioned. And she knew it wasn't a flaw. It was a form of vision. She didn't read people the way the others did. She felt them. She tracked mood shifts like changes in weather. She mapped emotion the way others mapped terrain. But none of that fit in a spreadsheet or a shooting drill. So it didn't count. She was cleaning her gear again when Sergeant Rodriguez stepped into the armory, clipboard in hand. "Dalton, you checked the Southern Tower supplies yet?" he asked. Casual but clipped. She nodded. 2 belts per station, fresh links, radios charged, spare batteries in the west crate. He hesitated, as if waiting for her to say more, then glanced down and spoke quieter. "You okay?" Avery looked up. A beat passed, then she nodded again. "I'm fine." Rodriguez didn't push. He never did. Of all the people at Redwater, he was the only one who didn't treat her like glass or pretend she wasn't there. He wasn't her friend. Not really, but he wasn't her enemy either. As he turned to leave, a low alert tone echoed from the main comm station. The room fell still. Then the base intercom crackled, and a voice came through. One of the watch officers. "All personnel, be advised, intel from division confirms increased enemy movement across Brady Pass. Units advised to remain on high alert. Repeat, heightened activity confirmed. Potential coordinated push within 72 hours. Avery's heart gave a small, quiet thump. She closed the rifle's dust cover and placed it gently on the table. Outside, boots thudded against the gravel as soldiers moved toward assigned posts, some muttering about drills, others falling into formation. But Avery stood still. It wasn't what was said that bothered her. It was what wasn't. She'd been watching the ridgelines for 2 weeks, tracking when and how shadows moved on the far rock faces. She'd seen the gaps widen between patrol frequencies, noticed the moments when the birds went silent, felt the mood of the air shift with something she couldn't explain. Now that shift had a name: movement. Brady Pass wasn't just a pass. It was a funnel. Avery turned, walked slowly to the north side of the armory, and pulled open the drawer beneath the comm shelf. Folded maps lay inside, topographical scans, notes in pencil, circles marked with numbers. She stared at them, feeling the dull churn of something rising in her chest. Not panic, not even fear. Recognition. She'd seen this shape before in drills and simulations. It was the shape of a trap. Her eyes moved across the markings she'd made weeks ago. Defensive gaps, overlap zones, blind angles. And then it clicked. If they came, they wouldn't come loud and wild. They'd come smart, coordinated. And every standard tactic Redwater had trained for would lead them straight into a fire corridor they couldn't escape. She took a long breath. The label they gave her didn't matter anymore. Not if she was right. Not if they were about to walk into the storm she felt building. And if she was the only one who saw it coming, then it was on her to be ready. The lights inside the old communications bunker flickered whenever the generator sputtered. Avery Dalton sat cross-legged on the concrete floor, a notebook balanced on her knee, her rifle resting against the wall within arm's reach. The air smelled of dust, old paper, and metal forgotten things. This was the only place in a fob Redwater where no one asked questions. No one looked for her here. It had been decommissioned months ago, now used for storing outdated headsets and cracked monitors. For Avery, it had become something else entirely. Her sanctuary, her lab, her war room. She flipped a page in her notebook, revealing a topographical sketch of the outpost and its surrounding ridgelines. The standard map had been augmented. She'd drawn not just cover and elevation, but emotional gradients. Circles denoted points of tension. Arrows pointed toward areas she believed would create psychological discomfort in an advancing force choke points with limited visibility. Terrain that funneled movement. The line where the sun would hit at dawn and blind you if you looked east. She called it her empathy grid. It wasn't standard doctrine. But then again, neither was she. Next to the maps were cue cards she'd written in pen and laminated with packing tape. Phrases, broadcast lines, voice patterns designed to mimic military chatter. Echo 2, hold your flank, Alpha reinforcements inbound. Sniper teams in position. Light up the ridge on my mark. Overwatch, we've got movement at grid 17. Shift all fire teams east. She practiced them aloud in different tones, confident, exhausted, panicked, recording them into a small voice modulator she'd quietly requisitioned months ago. Psychological pressure, she'd learned, wasn't about scaring the enemy. It was about confusing them, making them hesitate, making them feel watched. Her goal wasn't just to fight, it was to unsettle. Every evening, after finishing her assigned tasks inventory, supply counts, equipment checks, Avery returned here. She ran silent drills, practiced switching between firing positions, timed herself on reloads and displacements, wrote new scripts, redrew her emotion maps. No one knew. No one noticed. Except maybe Sergeant Rodriguez. He didn't ask about the long hours she spent off duty in the bunker. Didn't question why she carried extra batteries or why her uniform always smelled faintly of gun oil and marker ink. Once, he'd found her sketching alone on the mess hall steps after lights out. He sat down without a word, looked over her shoulder, and simply said, "You missed a crosswind channel here," then walked away. He never brought it up again. Rodriguez wasn't her friend in the traditional sense, but he saw more than the others, enough to understand she was preparing for something they couldn't yet name. Still, even he stayed silent when it mattered. That silence stung the most. The rumors about Avery hadn't gone away. If anything, the alert status had only sharpened the whispers. She was still the crybaby, still too fragile to be trusted on the front lines. The irony wasn't lost on her while others smoked or played cards after hours. She was rehearsing how to manipulate battlefield psychology with a busted comm system and a stolen weather radio. And all of it might go to waste, unless she did something, unless she spoke up. The next morning, as the sun stretched over the hills behind Redwater, Avery stood outside the command post with her helmet in hand, waiting for the right moment. Inside, Captain Huxley was finishing a briefing with 2 fire team leaders. His tone was clipped, authoritative. Avery watched them exit, nodding at his orders, then caught the door before it shut. He looked up, surprised. "Dalton, sir, I need 5 minutes," she said, standing at attention. He sighed but gestured toward the seat across from his desk. "Make it fast." Avery sat, but she didn't look down. Her voice was steady. "I believe the enemy will attempt a coordinated assault through the northeast ridge. There's terrain concealment, wind cover, and it funnels directly into our perimeter's weakest point." Huxley raised an eyebrow. "You've been studying maps, yes, sir, and patterns. They've been probing our outer routes with time burst 15-second volleys every 20 minutes. Always from 3 angles. It's not random." He leaned back, folding his arms. "And what's your source dream gut feeling?" "No, sir," Avery said quietly. "I understand how they think, and I know what they want us to do." There was a pause, brief, sharp. "I've drawn up predictive scenarios," she continued, reaching into her jacket and placing a folded page on the desk. "If I'm right, they'll strike in the next 48 hours. And when they do, our standard countermeasures will push us straight into the fire zone." Huxley unfolded the paper. His eyes scanned it, then narrowed. "Dalton, this looks like improv." "It's tactical psychology," she replied. "Unconventional warfare isn't always about firepower. Sometimes it's about perception." He set the paper down. "You're a specialist in logistics. That's your role. This kind of analysis, this isn't your lane. You don't have the clearance or the training. Avery didn't flinch. Sir, I'm not trying to override command. I'm trying to help. And I'm trying, Huxley said, voice sharpening, to keep you within boundaries that keep you and the rest of this unit alive. You're good at what you do when you stay in your box. That word again, box. It always came back to that. Avery rose from the chair, carefully. Permission to be reassigned to defensive coordination duty if the alert escalates. Denied, he said immediately. You'll remain on supply readiness and communication support. That's final. She saluted, understood, but as she stepped out of the office, her mind was already racing. The ridge wasn't just vulnerable, it was calling to her, not in some mystical sense, but in the cold, analytical certainty of someone who had studied every corner of this base like a chessboard. They were going to come through it, and no one would be ready. Back in the bunker that evening, Avery stared at the pile of notebooks and map overlays she'd compiled over weeks. She gathered them all, every page, every laminated cue card, every script she'd written for radio deception. She placed them in the center of the floor, then grabbed a half-empty fuel can from the supply shelf and unscrewed the lid. Her hand hovered, a flick of a match, and it would all disappear. The training, the hope, the belief that she might be more than what the others saw. But the match never struck. Instead, she sat back down and began to refold her notes with deliberate care. Somewhere deep in her chest, something had shifted, not resolve. That had always been there. This was readiness, not to fight, not yet, but to be exactly who she was when it mattered most. She closed the notebook, zipped it inside her rucksack, and whispered to the empty air, "If I'm wrong, none of this will matter." She looked again at the map, and if I'm right, they'll never see it coming. At 1:06 hours, the first mortar round slammed into the northwest wall of Fob Redwater, cracking open the sky and swallowing morning silence in a burst of fire and dust. The blast shook the earth hard enough to send stacked crates tumbling in the supply depot. Avery Dalton dropped to a knee instinctively, her ears ringing as glass shattered behind her. Seconds later, when the base alarm shrieked to life, she grabbed her rifle and bolted out the door. From her position near the depot, she could see movement, dozens of figures cresting the far ridge, spread out with tactical spacing. Not a random attack, not a raid. This was coordinated, organized, and it was already inside their perimeter. Enemy small arms fire lit up the east approach. Sharp, controlled bursts. She counted at least 3 support gunners and a squad of riflemen covering the draw. Then it hit her. They weren't pushing toward the center. They were driving the defenders out, squeezing them along a pre-planned route that led toward the south-facing slope toward the narrow path, with no cover and too little width for a vehicle. A funnel. A kill zone. She sprinted toward the command post, heart pounding, ducking under a string of incoming fire that snapped past her head like angry hornets. Sandbags exploded to her left. Someone screamed behind her. She didn't look back. Inside the CP, Captain Huxley was already shouting orders, pointing at maps on the table as radio operators scrambled to respond. His voice cut through the chaos. Evac Protocol Charlie, move all non-combat personnel to fallback sectors. Teams Alpha and Delta cover the South Pass. We are moving in 10, Avery stepped in without hesitation. Sir, she called, breathless. You can't send them south. That trail's boxed in. They're hurting us there. Huxley barely glanced at her. Dalton, not now. They're not attacking to occupy. They're forcing a retreat into a kill pocket they've already zeroed in. The ridge above that slope has sniper cover. I know it. Huxley turned fully now, eyes sharp. Unless you've got a satellite uplink I don't know about. You're guessing. I'm reading them, she insisted. It's the pattern, how they're sweeping, the fire intervals. I've seen this exact tactic in asymmetric pressure simulations. He stared at her like she was speaking another language. Avery, he said, voice lowering, this is real. This isn't your notebook. A deafening blast shook the building as another mortar landed near the barracks. Ceiling dust rained down. A radio operator dropped to the floor, hands covering his helmet. Through the haze, Rodriguez burst through the side door bloody, limping, his shoulder dark with crimson. "They've breached the east gate," he shouted. 12, maybe 15 pushed through with suppressive cover. Avery caught him before he collapsed. "Rodriguez," she gasped. "Hey, stay with me." He gritted his teeth, hand clutching the edge of her vest. "I saw the pattern, too," he whispered hoarsely. "You were right. Should have said something sooner." He coughed hard, blood streaking his lips. "I believe you now. But it's too damn late." Medics pulled him from her arms, hauling him toward the aid station. Avery stood frozen, shaking not from fear, but from clarity. From everything she'd tried to warn them about snapping into place like a nightmare blueprint. The radio blared again. "Command, this is Outpost Echo. We've got movement all across the west face. At least 30 more heavily armed. They're closing in. You've got maybe 20 minutes. Tops." Huxley looked at his team, then at the growing chaos outside. His face was pale. He knew they were cornered and running out of time. Avery stepped forward. "Sir," she said, "steady now. I'm staying behind." He blinked. "Excuse me, I'm going to hold the base," she said calmly. Alone. Someone scoffed from the corner. Another cursed under his breath. Huxley stared at her like she'd lost her mind. "Dalton, this isn't a movie. You can't stop 80 fighters by yourself." "I'm not going to fight them. Not conventionally," as she said. "I'm going to confuse them, delay, misdirect. You've seen my simulations. You've read my notes. No. What I've seen is a soldier who cries during training videos and thinks emotional patterns belong in a war room." Avery didn't blink. "I'm not asking permission," she said. "I'm telling you I have to do this. Not because I want to disobey, but because this is what I've prepared for. You trained your soldiers to shoot straight. I trained myself to fight smarter." Huxley stepped forward, lowering his voice. "If you do this and die, I'll have to write the report. Your name, your failure. If I don't do this, we all die," she replied. The fire in her eyes wasn't from anger. It was conviction. It was the first time in months he'd looked at her and seen no tears, only steel. Behind them, the radio cracked again. Perimeter collapsing. Reinforcements ETA 7 hours. No air support inbound. "You're on your own." Huxley's jaw clenched. "Your plan better be more than blaring rock music at the enemy." "It's more than that," she said. "I've prepped 10 firing stations with overlapping fields. I've scripted fake radio traffic. I have acoustic loops, light triggers, and modified broadcast decoys. I can make them believe this base is still fully manned." He was quiet for a long time. Then, without a word, he stepped aside. Avery nodded once and turned to leave. Rodriguez lay on a stretcher near the medbay entrance, barely conscious. As she passed, his hand reached out and caught her wrist. "I know what you're going to do," he murmured. "Make it count." She pressed her forehead gently to his. "I will." She gathered her ruck, her rifle, 3 belts of ammo, and the laminated cue cards from her bunker stash. Her boots echoed through the now empty corridors as the last evac teams moved toward the South Trail. When she emerged at the North Tower, the sun was low behind the ridges. Shadows stretched long across the valley. 85 enemies, maybe more, and she was alone. She looked out at the horizon. Her fingers brushed the earpiece she'd calibrated for enemy comms. Every breath slowed. This wasn't a suicide mission. It was a strategy. She wasn't betting on firepower. She was betting on fear, and they had no idea what was waiting for them. At 0700 hours, silence cloaked forward operating base Redwater. Smoke curled from the shattered perimeter wall, and ash drifted across the sand like slow snow. But inside the wreckage, behind reinforced barricades and cleverly rigged illusions, Avery Dalton took her position and whispered into a live mic. Alpha team, report. Bravo team, maintain flank suppression. Her voice was calm, measured. The words weren't meant for allies. They were meant for the enemy. From the ridgeline, opposing scouts huddled behind rocks, trying to decipher movement within the base. Every 5 minutes, a different shot cracked through the stillness from a different window, tower, or blind. Some were deliberate misses. Some were precise enough to chip bark or clip helmets. No two had the same rhythm. Avery rotated between 10 firing stations. Each one had its own personality. Tower 2 fired in pairs, controlled and professional. The southern bunker sent wild, chaotic bursts. The comms shack window fired once every 4 minutes, exactly like a machine. She wore different gloves at each station, left distinctive boot prints in the dirt, even placed empty energy drink cans or snack wrappers beside a few posts. Anything to suggest multiple soldiers with distinct behaviors. She wasn't defending the base. She was performing a cast of ghosts. Meanwhile, behind the northern barricade, her laptop ran a looped channel of fake radio chatter on encrypted frequencies. Snippets of overlapping dialogue played on speakers hidden across the interior. Alpha, flank left. We've got heat on the west corner Bravo. Pop smoke and fall back to position 7 command. We need medical evac at Point Delta from the outside. It sounded like a base under full-scale defense. To Avery, it sounded like theater. By the end of hour 2, she had fired 37 rounds from 7 locations, only 5 confirmed hits. But the real damage wasn't in the body count. It was in the hesitation building inside the enemy camp. At Oro 900, she intercepted a garbled voice over a hijacked radio. Still can't get visual on full team. Night Watch reports 8 separate shooters. No pattern. Possible ambush setup. Avery crouched behind the sandbags, wiping sweat from her brow. She smiled just briefly, then kept moving. By hour 3, exhaustion started gnawing at her legs. Every sprint between towers stole another breath. Her shoulder ached from recoil. Her voice was cracking from whispering fake commands. But she pressed on. At 10:13 hours, she activated a secondary loop, one designed for them to hear. Air support en route. 2 hours. Hold your ground. She transmitted it twice, with fake static and urgency. On the enemy side, confusion deepened. Her intercepted feed caught rising tension. You hear that they've got AS coming. I say we fall back and regroup. Negative. HQ says take the base before noon. No retreat. Another hour passed. She wept once, quietly. A single sob that escaped while reloading behind the destroyed watchtower. Her hands trembled. Her cheek was stained with dirt and gun oil, but there were no tears of fear now, only rage, only resolve, the kind that ran deeper than muscle or training. At 11:30 hours, the tipping point came. A barrage of RPGs hit the west wall. Dust clouded her vision. She crawled across the gravel and watched as at least 40 fighters charged the perimeter. Roaring. It wasn't subtle anymore. They were betting it all. Avery retreated to her most fortified position, the maintenance crawl space beneath the eastern ammo depot. From there, she had a narrow view of the central yard and full command of her decoy triggers. She didn't panic. She waited, and then she let the enemy fill her emotional map. Her notebook hadn't just charted positions. It had tracked where attackers would hesitate, where visibility dropped, where cover looked solid but wasn't, where shadows played tricks on depth. They sprinted into it exactly as she predicted. She opened fire silent, swift, unrelenting. Then she activated a rigged spotlight facing the east wall. A silhouette of a soldier appeared against the smoke, just a dummy on a pulley, but it drew immediate fire, revealing enemy muzzle flashes. She squeezed her trigger and dropped the lead man. Chaos erupted. The fighters splintered, some diving for cover, others trying to regroup behind a burned-out Humvee. And that's when she saw him. The commander. His vest had a scarlet armband. He was barking into a radio, pointing toward the flank. Confident, focused. Avery held her breath. She aimed 2 inches left of his ear then, just as he turned crack. He dropped instantly. The enemy transmission erupted. Commander down, repeat. Commander is. She didn't wait. She triggered a new audio sequence, overlapping voices, shouting orders in multiple accents, as if reinforcements were charging in from every direction. Suppress north stairwell, push them back. We're retaking control, snipers. Cover zones 5 through 8. She added another layer, a deep, growling male voice over the loudspeaker shouting, surrender now or face complete annihilation. It was a clip she'd recorded from a drill months ago. She'd pitch shifted it and embedded it into the speaker system. No one could trace its origin. Panic took hold. The enemy team split. Some ran. Some fired wildly into shadows. By hour 6, half the remaining force had either been hit or had retreated to the outer ridge. The rest scattered, leaving supplies and wounded behind. She didn't chase. She haunted. From hidden corners, she played predator sounds, canine growls, human footsteps, distorted laughter. Every 30 minutes, she fired a single shot from a new location, just enough to remind them someone was still watching. By the start of hour 7, she heard the final transmission she'd been waiting for. They've got full air coverage. This is a damn trap. Pull back now. And they did. The last figures fled into the ravine, dragging a single wounded man behind them. She didn't celebrate. She collapsed behind a half-buried crate, her chest rising in ragged bursts, her lips cracked, her fingers bruised. The sun was nearly gone. The world was quiet, and then far in the distance a low roar rolled across the sky. She sat up, blinking toward the horizon. 3 Black Hawks, 2 Ospreys, 1 C-130 banking wide, casting its shadow over the base like a slow-moving whale. She grabbed the mic with a shaking hand. "Fob Redwater," she croaked. "Secure?" She exhaled once, closed her eyes, and whispered, "Defender count. 1. The helicopter touched down just as the sun dipped below the ridge, casting long shadows across the scorched ruins of Fob Redwater. The dust hadn't yet settled when General Huxley stepped onto the gravel, boots crunching over spent casings and bits of shattered equipment. He scanned the courtyard, bodies covered, blood trails dried, empty shell casings glinting in the last light like teeth. And then he saw her. Avery Dalton sat propped against a crumbling blast wall, rifle resting across her lap. Her face was streaked with soot and blood, but her eyes were open, calm, focused. She didn't salute. She didn't rise. She just looked at him. And for the first time in Huxley's long military career, he didn't see a subordinate. He saw something else entirely. He walked toward her slowly. Around them, the rescue crew, medics, and special forces operators all moved aside unspoken, instinctive as if witnessing something sacred. Huxley stopped a few feet away, removed his helmet, voice quiet, hoarse. "Dalton, I was wrong." She didn't smile, didn't gloat. She nodded, barely. "It's all right, sir," she said, her voice dry but steady. "As long as you're listening now." 3 days later, in a secure conference room at the Central Command Training Facility in Texas, a special session was called. Urgent, confidential. On the screen behind the podium was a full tactical overlay of Redwater's final stand. Red lines showed enemy encirclement. Blue dots, only one of them represented defense positions. Avery stood next to the podium, now in clean dress uniform. Her arm was still bandaged beneath the sleeve. Her voice, though, carried the same quiet authority it had the night she stood alone. "This is the psychological battle map I constructed during the 3 weeks before the assault," she began, pointing to hand-drawn markings unlike anything the analysts had seen before. "It doesn't just chart terrain, it charts fear, instinct, predictable emotional reactions." She clicked again. More annotations. Strange color-coded circles and emotional triggers mapped over terrain. Each sniper position was designed not only for tactical impact, but for emotional manipulation. Each shot wasn't just lethal, it was intentional. A murmur moved through the room. General McAllister leaned forward in his seat. Another senior officer asked, Who taught you these psychological warfare methods? Avery met his eyes. No one. I listened. I watched. And more than anything, I refused to see the enemy as monsters. I saw them as people. That's how I knew what they feared. Silence fell. Not out of awe, but out of realization. She wasn't just an anomaly. She was proof the system was blind. After the briefing, Huxley caught her alone in the corridor. No rank, no posture, no walls. Just a man trying to say what he should have said a long time ago. I judged you from the moment I saw you, he said, because your hands weren't calloused, because your eyes were too soft, because you watched instead of barked orders. He paused. But what you did, I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't seen it. Avery didn't respond right away. She waited, sensing something more. Finally, she asked, will you change the way we evaluate soldiers? Huxley didn't hesitate. I won't just change it. I'll dismantle it, rebuild it from the ground up. No more observation corps as a dismissal label. No more non-combatant assumptions. He straightened. If someone understands the battlefield the way you do, they're not just combat ready, they're strategic assets. 6 months later, the lecture hall at Fort Grayton's Advanced Tactical School was packed. Operators, junior officers, special tactics candidates, all seated, straight-backed, silent, on stage. Avery walked to the front, now with short-cropped hair and a weathered notebook in hand, the same one stained with dried blood from red water. Behind her, a screen displayed a hand-drawn map. Good morning, she began, her voice clear, controlled. My name is Avery Dalton. I was once labeled not fit for combat, relegated to data gathering, considered a quiet liability. She stopped, letting the words settle. But today, I stand here not because I shot better than anyone else, not because I shouted louder, but because I listened deeper, observed longer, and believed stubbornly that emotions are not weaknesses in warfare. They are leverage. Every eye locked onto her. A young student raised his hand. Ma'am, what made you stay when everyone else doubted you? Avery thought for a moment. I wanted to leave, she said honestly. I wanted to burn this notebook. I wanted to quit Redwater. Her fingers tapped the cover of the book gently. But then I realized, if I didn't stand up for the truth I saw, no one else would. She lifted her gaze, steady as ever. My instructors once taught me to fight with a cold mind. She placed the notebook down on the podium. Today, I'm here to teach you how to fight with a burning heart, a breathless silence. That, she said finally, is the real strength.